Any further questions?
Thank you very much. Any questions from members? Yes, Councillor Woods.
Yeah, can I just clarify the position on the capitalisation directive, which is mentioned on page 24? Has that been confirmed yet? That we've got that?
No, that's the same issue that we spoke about in this morning's session, where we were saying we've had to go through a number of government steps to get there. So we've had the review by SIPFA. That report has now gone off to what was DHELG, which is now MHCLG. And we're waiting for them to confirm.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. I also have a question on page 49 about the income from beach car parks. At one point, we were talking about relining Minehead and the yellow lines. I wonder if that's been done, because that will have an impact on the car parking in Minehead.
I don't know the detailed answer to that question right now, but I can get that for you, Rosemary, and come back to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got Councillors Redmond, Chilcott and Sieb. So Councillor Redmond.
Thank you, Chair. Few points, but I'll start with the capitalisation bit first. We need to find a way to make the fact that that 36 point whatever it is million pounds isn't necessarily our income. We need to anyone that would look at the spreadsheet without any prior knowledge would think, actually, what are they moaning about? They ain't doing too bad, are they? But it doesn't. That we need to find a way to put some bells and whistles around that, to say, oh, this is subject to, or something like that, because without, I looked at it myself and I thought, it took me a second to realise where I was going on it. I really do think we need to do that. And we also need to make clear as well, I think, where directorates, I'll use the term, I hate it myself, where are using their contingencies in that as well, because I like us to know how bad. I like everyone to know how bad things are, because it would make them think twice, and potentially, my personal opinion, I stand to be corrected. The current position may be that they think that, to say that we're potentially looking at an overspend of about 2.5 billion, it's 4 million. That doesn't sound too bad, as the fact that that's dependent on us borrowing the best part of 40 million to cover that, and to then pay back again at some point. I'll do my other questions if you like, just to, or do you want to just respond on that one first, Chair?
I was just going to respond to say I'm very happy to look at a way of trying to pick that out of the report so the reader can clearly see that, whether we make it bold or whether we highlight the paragraph or something.
Yeah, I'm not alone in thinking that, because it's confusing. Okay, to my other points then. Oh, sorry, go for it. Yeah.
Thank you, through you, Chair. You're absolutely right, and it's not just the capitalisation directive that's included within here, but there's almost £40 million worth of reserves. There's £37 million worth of reserves that are also being used. So we've strengthened the paragraph, as Nicola's already said, in the executive report version of this report. So it's very clear that we're using both of those things in order to close the gap and set a balanced budget. We have also strengthened the way that we're presenting the information within the report, especially in the front of the report. So it's very clear that we're already utilising, while we've not allocated contingency of 6 million, it's been released into the forecast. The service directorates are actually overspending by 8.4 million, not the bottom line number of the 2.3. So we're making that clear in the narrative, albeit the numbers have got that line in. So when we present it internally, we put a ring around the 8.4. So it's very, very clear that that's the before contingencies being used or any of the other corporate items. But you're absolutely right, and we have to balance the budget and work towards a sustainable budget, so that we're not using one-offs in future years.
Thank you. Sorry, I lost my page. Bear with me too.
Right, Councillor Redmond, while you find that, if I could just comment on that, because that was one of the notes I'd made on here, that I was confused between the table and the narrative because of this 6 million, because within the table it looked like it was being allocated, and yet we then say in the narrative technically it hasn't been allocated. I mean, surely if we're not allocating at this point, we should just be showing the 8.2 rather than putting it in there, because otherwise that just gives a false sense of security.
The other bit I was going to look at otherwise, because if there was a part 2 of that table that's set underneath that showed money from elsewhere, then at least then you'd see the bottom it would be overspends would be clearer.
I think we need to do something with the presentation of the table because it's all contained in one. You're absolutely right. We're not allocating the money from contingency, but it's not being utilised to be allocated to service directorates to smooth their forecast overspends. What we've done is we've released it into the forecast so it can be offsetting what's happening within service directorates. There's a slight language change there, but you're absolutely right, and we'll split the table out in future. I'm hoping that the narrative at the front of the report draws the reader's attention to it, particularly paragraph 2. It's right there at the beginning. I don't know that we could make that any clearer, but we just need to ensure that the table does the same. I'll think about how we do that with Nicola.
Won't ask you to comment on this bit, but it may surprise some officers to know that not all councillors read all the paragraphs. My other points are acronyms. We're using acronyms a lot. I think at some point, and I'll say this in the bigger situation, Liz, maybe the executive may want to do something. We may need to have a central place where acronyms are defined, and a link to that from all services can be put in, so that it's easy, because I understand what DSG is and all the other relevant bits and bobs, but it may not be. So if at the bottom, perhaps Jamie might want to do this one, perhaps in the report somewhere, link to acronyms, and then have a central place where the acronyms are stored and updated, that might save, it saves officers having to do an acronym report at the end of each report. And if it's a central place, then we can all get used to pressing that button to go and look where it's to. So one place where acronyms is defined, maybe.
Apologies, we do try and pick them out. I think that
No, I
probably
know.
that paragraph went in last minute and it got slipped through. So apologies for
No,
that.
no, and I recognise that. It's just a thought that came to me actually when I looked at it. Okay, so I've talked about character. So I'm specifically then the top of page 39. Where it's talking the end of 38, where it's talking about the children's services budget and things like that. 2 points. I know you probably won't be able to answer them, but I'll do them anyway because it's important. When the one council was formed, the route to correcting problems should be made shorter and easier. It's concerning to still see that some of the reason why children's services aren't able to make some of their savings is because of planning issues. And that's what's talked about in the first paragraph, and vice versa. Secondly, we should be able to, when we're saying some of the problem about our not being able to meet our Thrive 16 plus issues is because there's not enough social housing for young people. Again, I refer you to the question. So it is more of a statement, but I think at this scrutiny committee, it's important. And I think we should be making that point over and over again, because when we talk in other places, or as we go through about the financial emergency and the transformation programme that we've got in place and the restructure and all the bits and bobs that related there, we should be able to preface most of our expectations by saying, and still do the day job. But we're not. And if we're not able to do these are 2 perfect examples of where things should be made easier and they aren't being. Planning. So, for us to be able to say that we're not able to open the homes that we have in the pipeline because our own planning team can't necessarily meet that expectation, that's an issue. And the fact that, and I'll be clear, I know that different bodies have recognised the fact that social housing particularly could benefit young people, and I know that officers are being brought into the room to be able to make that journey shorter, or that error shorter. We shouldn't be seeing statements like that. That's just the first 2 I've picked up and going through. So it's just a statement, Chair, more than anything else. And I know that you're already on it, but we need to keep repeating that so that we don't have to make the comments going forward.
No, I don't know. politics or say anything, but we did raise at the last meeting, didn't we, again, of making sure that if there are departments within our own council that should be helping to facilitate savings that otherwise we're going to be hitting, is something that we need to be putting pressure on. And by the sounds of it, you say that there has been resources put in to help move these particular ones forward. So
Yes, I definitely know that Claire Winter is Director of Children's and Alison Bloom Cooper, who's heading up planning. They have been in discussion and agreed for additional funding for a post there. So I know they have been working together. It's just unfortunate, seems to happen when there's a major issue rather than forefront.
Chair, could I just come back? And I'm speaking generally now, okay? Just the fact that children's services have to put money into another team to make the route shorter is also wrong. I understand the wills and emotion, but just for clarity, it was mentioned previously that when you have part of our business charging another part of our business to use that bit space, I understand it, but it's still wrong. But in this instance, children's services are already overspending, and we're using children's service money to
Yeah.
soapbox.
Can I just come back? Yeah, I don't disagree with what you've said at all, and I think the slight differences. I think it was a specialist planner that they've had to recruit in as an agency person, and they've helped fund that rather than they're just paying our own team to deliver that. So I think it was slightly different, but I do get what you're saying about.
Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the report. And I hope most councillors will get to paragraph 2 when they're reading the report, because that's fairly early on. But firstly, thank you for having a go at getting it in there, because I know it's something that I've been banging on about fairly incessantly. And I think it is in paragraph 2, but I have a thing about tables in that the dialogue, if it's in a table, needs to follow the table. So you might not connect paragraph 2 with what's represented in the table. But thank you for putting it there. And I think probably what's missing below that table is when below the table, you've gone through all the different directorates, you haven't gone through that total after contingencies bit. So it's probably a paragraph at the end of all the others just to say, you know, this is what it means. And it basically means that we are spending 75 to 80 million more this year than we've actually had in real terms. And I think it needs to be that basic, because that's the reality of where we're at this year. We all know it, but I just think it needs to be very explicitly put in the place. Like I said, is probably page 24, 25 when you're explaining the table. But thank you for having a go. I think it's really important that it's there, and it's really important. And I have talked again about messaging to the public. And I've had the conversation, I know, with Nicola, to say that when the public look at this report, they think everything's fine. So when we are having that dialogue about redundancies and pressures with staff, etc., it's not really breaking through in a report when the public read it. But that's not new, and we are on that journey, I think, to highlighting that more clearly. So moving on to the table. So the first thing is the legal agency spend. So my first question is that slowing devolution, which will affect, obviously, the speed of our devolution to our towns, parishes, city councils will affect the budget. So is the legal agency, because I know legal's under pressure, slowing that programme at all? That's my first question.
Thank you, Chair. I can't give a definitive answer, but I have looked at some of the asset transfers that have been going through with locum lawyers, and I'm not sure that I blame the locums. I think I blame the circumstances of the transfers, which are incredibly complex and much more complex than I ever expected them to be. So I've seen one that is actually not part of devolution to parish, town and city councils, but it's part of the town fund in Glastonbury. And that took, I thought it would take a couple of months. It's taken 18 months. And that's because the lawyer on our side has been covering absolutely everything.
And that came from a Mendip District Council asset that he didn't know before. And then I have to say this, the lawyer on the other side has been, if I use the words equally pedantic, I'm sure they've been pedantic for good reasons, but it is incredibly complicated. And I know that some of the devolution needed to happen more quickly. And so we've had to look at freehold disposal, lease disposal, short and long lease, and in some places license to occupy, in order to get that in time while the freehold transfer work continues. So I'd say if I could have my time again, I'd go back to Jason again and say, actually, I'm not terribly sure that the £600,000 earmarked reserve, which sounded huge at the time, I'm not sure that actually that's enough. And whenever I've talked to anyone else, because a lot of people obviously look to Somerset Council now for how do you survive this kind of situation, and that devolution to parish town city is one of the things they talk about. And I do always say, make sure you put in an earmarked reserve for legal and actually make it bigger, because huge amounts of money are used up, huge. I do agree with you.
It was a slightly different question. My question was, is that the capacity in legal to deliver the devolution at pace, so then we make the savings. So that's how it affects the budget when we hand an asset over. You know, that's our savings within the budget line. So my question really, because the paper's picked up pressure in legal, and I know we need to make the savings from our devolution programme, is there sufficient legal capacity to deliver that at the pace we need it for the budget? But I'll move on to the next question. So it's a slightly different answer.
If I can just come back very briefly, I think what saves this council more money rather than grass cutting is actually the devolution of services and the TUPE that goes with it. So that's why we were working with license to occupy, leases, as well as freehold transfer, in order to get that transfer of services as well as the leases on the assets moving. I just think officers have done an amazing job to get some of those devolution deals in place quickly. I completely agree that we will always be short of legal at the moment, and that will be part of the overall picture. I do agree with that.
Thank you. Next question is around climate and place. So we're seeing an overspend there. And that in the main is down to our uplift in the contract for waste, which I know and understand. My question is, why is that uplift, which was totally unforeseen at the time of the budget and the budget setting, why is that one-off uplift this year? So it's not in the budget. Why is that actually not coming out of contingency? And the reason I ask that is it's going to put that directorate over and in the red all year, really, and it's nothing to do probably with the original budget or the maintenance and monitoring of that budget.
To be honest, it's too early in the year for the contingency to be allocated to anyone. We're expecting everyone across the council that's got a forecast overspend to pull back that forecast overspend, finding mitigations. As Nicola's already said, within that particular directorate, they had some historical underspends in the prior financial year that we're reviewing. That if they can't bring back that particular budget line, we're expecting other budget lines to come in under to compensate. And at the same time, we're trying to also be very, very clear about what's one-off and what's ongoing, so that we have that actively planned within the medium-term financial plan and strategy moving forward. So we know that that's going to be a recurring cost that we're going to have. But there will be, whether there'll be recurring savings that we can take against it, that's what we're trying to work out at the moment.
Thank you. I think the question was because one, that was impossible to predict when setting the budget, and two, there's very little, they can't really do anything about that particular element for the rest of the year, however hard they tried. So my next question is around children's services. We can see that's where one of the main pressures are. When I look through the report, there are no mitigating actions really detailed. And I just wondered if there was some commentary on that, please.
Councillor Shearer go first.
More than happy if you've, unless you've got better answers than I have over there, which I'm always happy to listen to. Yeah, forgive me, one of the things I have been trying to work on with my colleagues around the reports that come forward is to make sure that every month when we're reporting something that we're actually not changing it for the sake of it, but making sure that the numbers are actually, you have mitigations for them. So first off to say, thank you for spotting that one, but we haven't quite got there yet with the reports. In terms of the mitigations, at the moment, we're still doing quite a bit of kind of understanding and checking that we're not actually taking children into care that we shouldn't be taking into, making sure that we're doing the right thing with them. It's going to be a joy, isn't it? I move over here. This one, what would this be? Is that better? Oh, marvellous. Thank you very much. Yes, so I think we alluded originally as well to the transformation board that we have and the finance board that we have as well, trying to keep that hold on what we're spending and why. So there's some mitigation in that regard. And we had a deep dive into the children looked after, why we have the numbers that we have. And we're also working on things like a more dynamic purchasing system to try and look at, perhaps in a small way, but look at block purchasing and contracting of residential accommodation, so we're not always relying on spot purchasing. So there's a number of things we're trying to pull it back, and then wider things as well around. And it's harder to see the links. It may take a while, but one of the things we're also doing is that children on the edge of care are often the ones who are not actually in school. So it doesn't seem like it's related, but the education side of children's is working super hard on, first of all, on a pilot, which we're going to then roll out to everybody, where we've been looking at what is stopping children from being in school, what's keeping them on part-time timetables, trying to prevent exclusions, because again, if they're in school, they're much more likely to stay out of being in care and also out of exploitation and so on. So some of them are very short term. How can we actually make the cost day on day be a little bit lower, and others are much wider systemically to try and ensure that have fewer children actually at risk of being in care. It's a bit of a wide gamble across there, but just they're the mitigations we're working on.
Thank you. So coming back, the dialogue we've heard that if there's an overspend, we will expect some mitigation action. What I didn't hear within that, and I hope the finance team are doing, is saying how you're going to do it and how much and from where. And that's the bit that I'm missing, if I can ask that. Sorry, I've got two more questions after, Chair, if you can bear with.
You're absolutely right, and we're expecting everyone to tell us that. Equally, these are forecast overspends, so including your original question, these are forecasts that are going to happen. We're expecting services to be taking action to prevent these forecasts happening in the first place, not just finding responses to these financial matters in terms of mitigating actions to pull back the forecast overspend. There should be two actions that are taking place simultaneously to make that happen. Equally, if more children come into care during the financial year, those placements will need to be included. And if our assumptions around the forecast don't include them at the rate that they're coming in, then they will need to be adjusted for. But equally, there should be, I understand that there's a panel that is reviewing placements in order to step them down as well. So when they come to a point where they can actually be stepped down, reviewing the commissioning costs and so on. So I'm expecting to see a number of mitigating actions happening, but also included in all directorate appendices in future reports. So we've got that clarity about what is being done, how much of it we can count, and we'll be tracking it the same way we track savings delivery.
Thank you for that. And I only picked.
We've got Councillor Shearer behind you as well, wanting to make a further comment. That's all right. That's okay.
So yeah, just really quickly, and Maria's absolutely right. We feel the heat, let's say, of scrutiny on us, and I think that's what should be happening, quite rightly fiscally. But the other thing to say is watch the lines where the underspends are, because at the moment we're carrying an underspend on fostering, which is only at 0.8 million. But we've got overspends on residential, and those two things are clearly linked. We need to have the underspend on resi and the overspend on fostering, and that's not happening. You'd see the same in adults, if I may skip across border for a second. When you see overspending on home care in adults and you see underspending on residential, that's part of their strategy going forward. Now they've got it right. At the moment, we have to pull that back, and so we're working super hard on fostering, because that's a much. But we know there's at least 30 children who are in residential who really ought to be in fostering, and if they were in foster care, that would have quite an impact on that residential line.
Thank you. I'll wait for the next report so we see what's in them. So I look forward to that. Last two questions, I'll throw them together. First one is that there's an impact assessment on the end of this paper, but it's all blank, so I don't know if that should or shouldn't have been there. And my last question is actually around risk, and the financial risk on this report is still showing at 20. But when there are other reports coming forward around transformation, for example, the financial risk is a very lower figure. So I'm just wondering why there's not sort of consistency across financial risks. Thank you.
So in response, I don't think that part of the appendix should have been there. I think it's a new template, and we're just getting our head around how it all works. Some of it's locked down, and the team will be helping us to ensure that we don't include things that don't need to be there. In terms of your other question around financial risk, the risk here is about the overarching risk to the council and not an individual project risk. So this particular one is where are we across the whole council now, given that we're forecasting an £8.4 million forecast overspend if we don't include contingency, and the budget is predicated on almost £80 million of one-off, combination of earmark reserves and capitalisation directive. I think the financial risk is exactly where it needs to be in terms of the matrix. If we were seeing an improved position, and underspending service directorates, or even a balanced position without the use of contingency, then it would be reflected in where we are at this point in the year. But equally, we'd still be stressing that we've used one-off funding to set the budget, and the plan is to be setting a sustainable, robust, balanced budget.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the responses.
Thank you. Councillor Seeb. Didn't see okay, Councillor Shearer.
No, it's just a really quick one to say. When I was making the comment about the mitigations in the papers, I was not having a go at my colleagues in finance. I was having a go at my own colleagues in children's to actually get the content right. I thought, oh my God, they don't think I'm having a go. Just to make sure.
Just wait until the next session with finance, and then you'll find out whether they're holding anything against you. Councillor Seeb.
Well, Councillor Shearer spiked one of my guns, but I was going to point out the close linkage of certain lines. Because adult got rebaselined, it should be a very good monitor. And I had noticed that the home care was red and the residential was green, and that it was overall underspending. And I just think we ought to perhaps find some way of presenting that there is a trade-off going on and that it's effectively one management line. And I wonder if we ought to perhaps make it one management line. There are other cases where we have things in separate lines. So, for example, if you look at some of the costs, they're supported by a split budget where there's other partners in there. And I'm not sure it's entirely right and proper for us to be measuring the total service spend if we aren't getting the benefit, because we have to then share any reduced spend with the Intermediate Care Board, for example. I just think, you know, we ought to take a good look at this while it's still fairly fresh, and make sure it is nice and clean for our purposes. Having said that, I would like to know why the intermediate care was a 2 million variance on an 8.8 million budget. That's nearly 20%. And I really don't think it's fair to give a green for the group when one of them is 20% off. So do we have an understanding as to what was driving that? Also conscious I'm asking the question 2 months after it happened, 2.5 months after it happened. I think my point is, if that's a normal variance on the line, then it shouldn't be being reported separately. It should be part of a bigger pot, because you can't have 20% reporting variance, and it's still saying it's going to be a saving over the year.
Councillor Shearer, I think you want to comment. Well, thanks.
Yeah, sorry, just quickly, just to say, I hear where you're coming from, Peter, and I agree in lots of ways, but I think it might be hard to make those, you know, I hope I didn't oversimplify something by saying this is linked to this. And it might just be that, but first of all, I don't know, but what it might be with the intermediate care in the adult side is a massively vexed issue. It's a system issue. And I know that is quite complicated. So the fact that it may be trending higher now, there may be mitigations coming up that we don't dare forecast. I'm sure Maria's got some detail on that. I think the other one just about linking, it's interesting because you made me look at the children's one as well in terms of all the different types of placements that there are. I think perhaps this is part of the mitigation and part of the narrative that we help people understand which things are contingent on each other. I think the difficulty about making it completely like a singular line, and my colleagues in finance know far more than I do about this. Very often there's quite a lot of income that comes in to support these things as well as what we're spending out. So it might be very messy to get to a bottom line. But forgive me, I was giving them time to have a think what the answer was to the intermediate care.
That's okay. Through you, Chair. On page 34, there's a small breakdown. There's a small paragraph regarding commissioning that relates to that whole piece. I think it needs to stay within where it is. I take the point about needing to explain such an overspend. I think this whole piece, as the paragraph states, is they're changing their focus to re-enablement. This is all about getting people back on their feet so they don't need the care. Equally, the discharge to assess process within the hospitals hasn't worked in the best way, even across the country. So we've been seeing increased costs coming through from that route. I know that adult social care and our health colleagues are working very, very closely together to ensure that that process is as smooth as it can be for the client involved, so that they're at the heart of the care that's being provided. And we want to ensure that we're not escalating costs for a long period of time that are unnecessary. What we want to do is, if people can get back to doing the activities that they could or the independence that they had before, then our job is to help them get there, which is why the re-enablement process is the one that they're focusing on. I think if our adults colleagues were in the room, they'd be elaborating on that.
Yeah, I think the difficulty I've got with that is that's an adult scrutiny answer to the question. We're trying to control the flow of resources to the service. And if there are lumps in the measure, which are the same order of magnitude as the actual total annual budget, we're not going to, it should be aggregated with something. This was why we wanted the graph to actually show, the cumulative spend over the year, and were you going to be able to visually see, are you going to hit your target? Because any lumps would be apparent as either a lump, or as your verbal description made it sound like a trend, which immediately sticks my alarm light on and goes, I now need to get onto that and make sure it doesn't become a trend. Because if that's a fundamental project and it's spending money to do it, I need to make sure that we rebalance the budgets, and wherever the saving is being made comes down to this line, or they get aggregated together. And it was about this sort of level of reporting thing. Our purpose here was to find out if anything's out of plan. In order to do that, the plan has to actually be good and accurate. And I just felt like 20% being reported in 1 month as a deviation. It's a little bit like photographing your odometer and speedometer to try and predict when you're going to arrive at home, and you happen to be sat at the traffic lights at the moment, so it's showing 0 miles an hour and 1/4 of a mile. It's not a good basis as a measure. You actually need to take it over a period of time, because it goes up and down a lot.
Just before I come back to officers, Councillor Wakefield is with us online, and you've got your hand up. You wanted to come in?
Well, yes, thank you, Chair. Really, to say, I mean, Peter's right. We should be looking at this in a sort of macro way rather today in this committee. There has been an uptick in people needing to go into bedded care over the last 2 or 3 months, bigger than we would have forecasted. I can't really tell you the reasons for this, but they are, rather than going home, there are more people needing to go into care homes. And we don't know whether that's a trend that's going to continue, but there has been a bit of an uptick, which I think is part of the additional cost, because we've got certain commissioned beds as people know. And if we haven't got enough beds in the right place or the right sort of beds, we have to commission extra ones. And I think, as I say, there's been an uptick in people needing to go into a bed rather than to go home, despite our best efforts to get them home. I'm hoping that that trend will fall away again, but I need to talk to the lead officer when she's back from leave next week. I can't give you any more information than that, but I'm sorry about the overspend.
Did finance want to come back at all?
I just wanted to pick up, you're absolutely right, but the swing that's happened at month 4 on that particular line, and I was just looking for it, it's reduced by 100,000. So it's been there for a couple of months. What I'm saying is the service have now got actions that they're trying to take. So there's a recognition that there's a problem. They're taking some action, and that action, the re-enablement pathway, should be a long-term response to this, not just dealing with the symptoms.
If I could just respond, yes, that's why we wanted a month-on-month graph again. So, you know, let's get that done. And secondly, I was picking on this area because it was re-baseline, and I am so reassured that Councillor Wakefield, you know, bang straight on the issue. It shows that this can be done. Remember, this is a service which has brought us to tears in the past in terms of the financial position, and it does appear to be being managed now. I look forward to seeing similar levels of compliance elsewhere.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Yeah, I am slightly concerned that the overspends are being mitigated by underspends within the directorates, and how sustainable that is long term on other, you know, vital aspects of those directorates, and whether, you know, the pressure is then going to fall onto other directorates to then meet those balances. I just wondered if you've got a view on how sustainable that is, and for how long, in terms of what figures you can accept going forwards without feeling very uncomfortable. I've got a couple of others. Do you want to do that one first?
To do that one first. So any forecast overspend is uncomfortable, especially given our financial position and how we set the budget originally with almost 80 million of one-offs. So it's an uncomfortable budget in the first place. I would say any forecast overspends need to be addressed. What I'm asking for from the organisation is our ongoing actions that will enable us to ensure that the budget is aligned in the right places on an ongoing basis. If a service has got a one-off action, while I'd accept it within the year because it will help us reach a balanced outturn position, actually it doesn't help us long term. It's just a sticking plaster. So what I want from the organisation is an ongoing response to this. And I've made it clear in the medium-term financial strategy and plan that is on the executive agenda next week, in order to ensure that we're taking action so that we're not in a position where the forecast challenges that we can see coming up in the future become a fait accompli in the budget. I want to see action within the organisation to prevent these things happening. So we might be able to, for example, model in demand in the future. Today we model it. Last month we modelled it, a year ago we modelled it. It will all be different as to what that future happens. I want to see that modelling of that demand being as realistic as possible. And then I want to see the list of actions that services are taking to prevent that demand reaching our front door in the first place, or escalating, so that we're in charge of our own destiny to in some respects. That's what I'm expecting to see. So one-off actions can deal with one-off problems, give us a short-term fix for an ongoing problem, but I want to see ongoing actions, not just new savings coming up, but ongoing actions to the problem in the first place.
And you know, my main concern is that those underspends are coming from things that are being cut or being curtailed that are really vitally important as well. So thank you for that. The other point I just wondered, when you talk about the contingencies, would it be possible to put what percentage of the contingency is being used up, just to get some idea of the scale of contingency that has been allocated? Because when it says 6 million is being used for contingencies or whatever, you know, it's not always clear what proportion that is of available contingencies.
The short answer is 100% of the contingency that was built into the budget.
Okay.
So we only have 6 million contingency. within the budget, and all 6 million has been released against the 8.4
Okay,
million.
apologies.
So
that's
it's
my
not a great
misunderstanding.
position to be in, which is why we're stressing the fact that just because the overall forecast overspend for the council is 2.3 million doesn't mean that that's okay. Even if it was 100,000 doesn't mean it's okay, because we're utilising a full 6 million. Ideally, we want to see ourselves in a position where you're hearing from me that we've got a forecast underspend of 6 million because our contingency hasn't been touched, and the service budgets that we've set are sufficient to manage not only the things that we knew about at the beginning of the financial year when we set the budget, but to deal with any unforeseen things as well, because we're able to respond to those changing financial circumstances. At this stage, it's the forecast overspend. And there's lots more work to be done here to ensure that the basis of what's in that forecast is correct in terms of what comes to fruition, what crystallises as we move through the year. But there's also a lot of action that needs to take place to prevent this forecast being a year-end position.
Okay, sorry, that's my misunderstanding. I didn't realise the contingency was the whole contingency. I assumed that was only going to be part of what might be available. Because it was rather scary then to think that was it. Just one final question. The planning issues that are holding back Horizon, is it possible to share what they are, or is that known? Is that, I'm really concerned that something so positive is being held back by another directorate.
Councillor Shearer.
I can give a little bit to this one, and I hope I get this one right, because some of it predates me in a way. There's a couple of ways in which we've had some delay. Some of it was originally around the actual homes themselves, and so early doors we had some difficulty getting planning permissions and certificate of continuing use and stuff like this. That's on homes 6 and 7, I think it is. So that's been a little bit of an issue for us on occasions, because we haven't got our certificate, the certificate of lawful use development. We've also had the other thing that has been complex, and this did really predate me. During summer of last year, decisions were made, or were being helped with the plan to have the pods and annexes in gardens. Pods and annexes were intended to be for, they're like obviously singular pods, literally, that be craned in, that we could cover under the caravan law, and make them a acceptable development. But that in order to meet that, there were two different types of pod or annex that we could go for, and there's a bit of a backwards and forwards about which would be the best one in terms with our planning colleagues and with our own design team to say what would be the best thing. That because we delayed a bit, then we got really held up a little bit, understandably, through the finance boards, quite like the challenge boards, not very much, but a little bit. So there's been a couple of things. So that tends to be what it is. And I'm not laying any blame anywhere on occasions. It's just been difficult. And I guess one of the issues that may well be is, I think Lee's exactly right, we work as one whole team, but we also have to be very careful that we don't jump the queue and say that our own internal planning is much more important than anybody else's planning. So we always have to be a bit careful there. So we've had to take our turn in the queue.
Do you have any idea where that sits at the moment in terms of being delivered?
Only from the point of view of now that we've actually got the go-ahead to actually have some additional support, then we can at least be doing a little bit more to get the certificates right. But I couldn't say at the moment. It's not really holding up the homes anymore. 6 and 7, I think, have opened. Number 8 is on its way. I don't think that's been delayed. It's a smaller part of the process because each pod or annex will only take one person. So it's not quite there yet, but we're getting there slowly.
So I had just one more question, and it's really just clarification rather than a question on this report. So if you get the go-ahead on the capitalisation directive, where will that show? So I was looking at page 23 and it's listed there at the bottom. I'm just trying to understand, do we have any monies that have come in under that? Where they're sitting at the moment, if we have, under any asset sales? And how will it then get earmarked amongst directorates? How will it be used should that go-ahead come through?
Councillor Lyshaw.
There are two different, there are 3 lots of asset disposals. There's the devolution to parish, town, city councils, Then there's the sale of non-operational assets, where a list of, I think it was 20 different assets went through a recent executive meeting for a decision. So rather than be taken as a lead member key decision or an officer non-key decision, we put them all together in one paper. So that is somewhere, and you'll think I'm sounding vague, and I'll tell you why. It's between 20 and 30 million pounds worth of disposals in this current year. And the reason that's vague is because with the legal and with all the situation, literally the legal situation of each sale, some of them may fall the other side of April the 1st, and so they'll go into the next year. And then there's the sale of the commercial investments, which is a more significant number. But again, we'd need to wait for the next executive subcommittee meeting for property and investments to get an update on those figures. But it won't, because of the way Treasury management and local authority accounting works, you won't go, oh, well, that one's been sold, so that one goes to children's, and that one's been sold, and that one will go to adults. It all comes into a block. And actually, something that interests me is I used to get into shocking trouble at work for putting the expenditure before the income. I was always told, you earn that income first, and then you spend it. So actually, if we put the income to the top of the page, I would be quite happy with that. And I think I agree with everyone who said that it would be helpful for the contingency to be shown more clearly. I guess this table, I think, has come through Solver. Has it, Nicola? Has that come from Solver? So that's presumably it comes out of that piece of software, and it looks like that, and then it's placed into this paper. But I think we can do better on how these tables are presented.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, sorry.
I was just going to add at the bottom of the table that Councillor Lation was referring to, you can see the capitalisation direction right at the bottom. So we're trying, what I think we need to do is make that income bit a little bit clearer.
I mean, and just understanding when it does come through, where it's showing.
It will show in that table, in the actual column on the capitalisation direction has a 0. So when it comes through, it will be there. The forecast outturn is forecasting that we will receive it. So we are hopeful in this forecast that it would come through.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions from members, so thank you very much for the report. I think it's been useful over the months that we've been doing this. There have been sort of iterations of improvement in the reports, of suggestions have been taken on board. So thank you very much for doing that, and we'll look forward to the next iteration. I think also members obviously were highlighting, if we can, within the reports from the service areas, make sure we've got a bit more detail on the mitigations that are coming through as to how we're addressing the shortfalls that we've got in those. And I just wanted to also just thank the executive members who are present with us as well, because it's very useful to hear straight from you, because that enables members to get a bit of a better understanding as to what's happening behind the figures. So thank you to the three of you that we've called on today. Excellent. If members are happy, we'll move on to the next report, which is to some extent taking us back in time. You'll remember at our last meeting we deferred from the agenda the outturn reports from last year so that we could focus on the first quarter of this year. So we now have the first item under agenda item 6 is the budget monitoring report for outturn. So who wants to lead on that? Councillor Lation, do you want to go first, or Ms. Hicks?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just go first to say where you saw a quote in the local press this year about having been able to breathe slightly easier for a while this summer, but not for long. That referred to this outturn figure. So I will hand over to Nicola Hicks for detail, please.
Thank you, Councillor Lation and Chair. Yeah, so it feels like it's looking back in time, and unfortunately for the finance team, we're still just closing off the accounts for 23-24, so still very much in the mix of this. I think this report followed on from when Jason brought forward a provisional outturn position, which was at 1.6 million. That was just ahead of the services were closed, but there was just some corporate adjustments that had to be followed through the accounts, and that did mean it's slightly changed by 0.2 to have a result of a 1.8 million underspend for the year. If you go down through the report, it talks about the overspends were largely in children's and adults. And what we tried to do, or what I tried to do, is the table 2. You will see those on page 72. You'll see the RAG status there around adults and children's are red, but largely the remainder of the organisation came in underspent. Interestingly, we will see on that table under strategy, workforce and localities, governance, democratic and legal services, the 1.1 there. So you'll see that we are seeing that follow through to this financial year, just in terms of the report you've just seen. But interestingly, some of those other services there where we talked about can climate and place look to cover that overspend that's for a result of the waste contract. I take on board your comments around that's at the detriment of other things being delivered. So I think part of our work we're doing now is to analyse that outturn position from last year. What was one-off? What was reoccurring? And actually, will that remain reoccurring? I think what we've seen is, as we had a new finance system and amalgamated all our budgets together 5 into 1, some of the budgets were quite complex in areas where you had 5 kind of district budgets that were put together. And I think as we've started to unravel some of that, we have seen that actually the understanding of the budget and what it's being utilised for has come through. And I think some of that has shown in the variances that weren't probably first predicted, but then came to fruition at year end in terms of realising that they didn't need that money as those budget holders understood their budget a bit more. I think this is some of the, I know personally from having a finance team that struggled with that legacy knowledge, not having that legacy knowledge there in terms of those budgets, the teams have struggled slightly, and I think they've done a remarkable job of getting their heads around it and kind of understanding those. So that table just shows there what we try to do in, just flipping down through the report, under the section 25, which table 2 there, was just talk about why did it change from month 10 to month 12? So why did we go from that position that we were reporting there? So I think we just tried to, for each service, put why did they put, and kind of, I hope that kind of came out of the report. If not, we probably need to look at next year's outturn report to see how we can highlight that a bit more. One thing I just probably want to point out in this report is just in terms of the reserve section on page 76, there you'll actually see down there we actually made a contribution to the reserves in the end because of that underspend that came through. So that was a totally different position than what we were predicting at month 3, in terms of actually if we did that overspend had remained, we would have seen those reserves be depleted in order to cover that. So that's a good position to be in. What I would say is it obviously hasn't left us swimming in reserves. It just means that it was a better position than what was forecast back at month 3. Just in terms of paragraph 29, when it talks about flexible capital receipt strategy, when we agreed to fund the work of My Life, My Future from Newton, that was originally to be funded from reserves, and then it would be paid back in terms of the savings generated there. What we've done is actually the decision was made to swap it over so that the funding of that project was paid for from capital through the flexible use of capital receipts, which is a lot of question of why have we done that in terms of what does that mean the savings aren't going to come to fruition. It just means that the spend is in capital and the savings are in revenue, for example. So there again protects our reserves in terms of we can use receipts to pay for that. So there's just it's a little bit of an accounting jargon there, but I know there has been some inquiries on that, so I just thought I would cover that off. Not planning to go through each of the appendices, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Seave, you were first.
I thought I'd just make an observation. It's quite a lengthy report, and I found it very useful. In fact, it finishes around page 142, and there's an awful lot of red ink in it. And in particular, I just by accident flicked through to page 79, I think it is, which is the old adult services for the month. I remember when all the tables that we were looking at looked like that, and I think it's quite an interesting contrast. So well done, everybody, for getting a grip with that particular one. And let's hope we manage the same transformation elsewhere. Just presentationally on page 71, where you've got the savings achieved, unachieved. I don't think it's actually particularly helpful to have it the way up that you've got it, because we've got the green ones, we can bank those. The ones you've coloured in red are really just that was the plan, and we failed to achieve the plan. So our savings are not the headline figure. They're the green ones. I think
it's a very good point, and we will take that on board. Yeah.
Other than that, I found it really useful. Good summary.
Thank you. Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think the team must be really pleased actually this report's here and it's sort of all come together, and I don't underestimate the amount of work, so huge thanks to them. So my comments are, so the dialogue at the opening of the paper states that you've addressed the in-year overspend with several spend control boards, and they successfully tackled the problem with an underspend of 1.8 million. I don't agree with that statement, and I'll tell you why. Adults and children were overspent by almost 30 million, and that's the main thrust for those control boards, amongst others. And there were a number of one-offs in the year. We had several grants from the NHS, 2.5 million, a workforce grant, 3.8 million, connecting Devon and Somerset, one-off clawback of 8 million. Economic development underspend 1.8 million. I don't think that was great to see. Actually, economic development is really important for Somerset. And a non-service of 10 million due to the level of borrowing being less than anticipated. So for me, whilst it came out an underspend of 1.8 million, there were lots of one-offs there. I think I brought it to 26, 28 million. And had all those one-offs not come through, we would have been quite well overspent. So again, public messaging wise, it looks good. We've come in with a modest underspend, which is good, but I think there are a lot of one-off scenarios to support that position. And again, that real concern in adults and children's. And moving forward, we've heard commentary that adults are looking much better and it's balanced. It's because it's taken a larger percentage of our overall balance, and that then puts pressure on those services actually which many of our residents value, the roads, the sweeping, the place things that actually affect all of our residents. And those are important to those that we serve. The other area of concern is I went through the earmarked reserves and had a look, and thank you for putting those with the report. And I note that in 2 years between 23, 24 and 25, so that 2-year period, there's a reduction of 2/3 on the reserves. If you look at the tables, that's a colossal amount of reserve usage. So I think that's a concern. And the last thing of concern again is those savings, which we've already had touched upon, 8.8 million unachieved. And it comes back to that financial management, that if something isn't achievable, something else needs to be found in its place. That didn't happen last year, and we cannot afford for that to happen this year. So that was a concern as well. So great that it's a modest underspend. I think there's a lot behind it that is still of concern for me on reading it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Chilcott. I'll take them on board when we produce further reports, just to make them transparent in terms of those points you've made. Just wanted to comment really on the savings, that actually we've made a decision, although the savings and whether the achievement of them has been included in the quarterly reports, we're actually going to make your reports even longer on a monthly basis, include them monthly, and actually not just the ones that are being flagged as unachievable at risk. You're actually going to get all of them. And what we're going to try and do when we talk about the changes we're making to the appendices, not only in terms of the graphic showing trends against last year and mitigations, what we want to also see is then kind of confirming that those savings will be delivered. What it's very easy for services to say things are on track or going to be delivered, but actually then when it comes to December and then they suddenly flag that they might not be achieved. It's around how do we start challenging some of that now and questioning when is it going to be achieved? When can we see that in the budget? You know, is that going to be jeopardised at all by anything else that's happening in the organisation? So we're going to start including that.
Councillor Lyshaw.
Thank you. I take on board your points, and I'm sure that everybody shares them. When I was first elected in 17, I remember being astonished that the adults' expenditure was around 100 million and the children's was around 60 million. And now they've both more than doubled. And I think that every single elected member of this council has concerns about what else has to give in order that those figures increase. And at the parish council I attend, so Street is a parish, there was some concern about the parish taking on, I think it was 23,000 a year for cleaning the loos. And I took the current figures for adults and children's, added them together, divided them by the entire population of Somerset, including newborn babies, and then I times that by the population of Street. And I said, if Street were an average place, and nowhere is average, that would be costing in Street 8.4 million a year to look after those adults and children and families that need the council's care. That is on an annual basis and growing. So frankly, 23,000 didn't look too bad to me. And the room went very quiet, actually. And I think that that is something that we all need to better understand, that these monies that are spent on statutory need, they are not spent on a separate cohort of people that come from somewhere requiring services. They are the people that live in your road, my street, my town, your village, and actually it is all part of what this council does. The impact that has on other parts of the budget, I completely agree with you. And I think having gone to one council and now being under pressure from inflation, interest rates and all the rest that we can rehearse endlessly, it is going to become more and more important that we do actually explain to people how much is spent on those services, social care, and why it is. It's not just because we choose to spend it or that somebody comes from elsewhere and requires us to spend it. It is the council's statutory responsibility to do so. Thank you.
And just on the savings item, in the new financial year, I should have mentioned this under the other reports, we've got 26 million that's on track to be delivered. That has to be delivered along with anything else that's at risk or unachieved, because we don't want to see the forecast swing. So we're tracking all of that. That's why we're going to be releasing them on a monthly basis, not just on a quarterly basis, so that we can all have that visibility of progress.
Thank you, and thank you for all of that. I mean, I just made the point because, again, looks great as a headline. When you start delving behind it, there are still levels of concern, and certainly those earmark reserves. You know, one of the measures of a healthy organisation in council terms is the level of reserves, and I know ours compared to many councils are very, very low. So that's the reason I raise it.
And if we want to talk about risk, we should not miss out the dedicated schools grant deficit, because if there's one thing that is becoming increasingly urgent for upper tier councils right across the country, that's the one that needs to be top of the list for government at the minute. So it's not just dealing with the accumulated deficit, it's about how we deal with that expenditure going forward. We have all got really big risk there.
Councillor Seeper.
Thank you. It strikes me that we're in danger of not quite doing all of our job. We're doing one bit very well. So to my mind, there are 4 measures that you need to take into account in order to get to value for money. One of them is trend, if you like. Are you getting better or worse? And in particular, do you face any sustainability issues? One of them is the cost of the service, and we do that really well. We are really good at measuring cost. We are really good at trying to think in terms of controlling cost. What we're not particularly great at is thinking in terms of the value generated with that money. You know, what are the services delivered? So actually, I think the point which Councillor Lation made about you know, this many people looked after, this looks after the population of so and so, or this many people are being looked after. I think that really ought to be part of this report, really, in the sort of service. I know it's ridiculous to try and reduce the service to a one-liner, and it could possibly roll and change each time. But the point is, the value that the value proposition needs to have value as well as the cost. And the final thing that we've not played with, and I'm aware that Councillor Lation's got hopes that we will be able to play with it in the future, is the funding, the incoming funding, because sometimes we are funded out of grant, and other times we work with partners, and sometimes it's just the tax base. You know, and that is fundamentally where we're struggling at the moment. You know, we have very low tax base for historical reasons, and that just needs to, you know, the fact that we're rubbing along on that. If we had a collective sort of four perspectives view in this report, and I'm not talking about making the report 4 times longer, I'm talking about trying to actually generate a one-liner for those. In particular, you know, where we don't think we're sustainable because we don't have foresight of income with which to deliver the service. You know, that's a key bit, which I don't think we're after at the moment in producing the resource picture. We should be after budget and source of funding, not just what we spend.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other comments. So all I was going to say was, again, thank you very much for the report, the work that's gone into this. I think members will certainly value the monthly updates coming forward, because one of the things that was difficult with this is you see the graph going along and suddenly there's this wonderful improvement at the end, which is great that we got it, but it's like, it would have been nice to have been able to plan some of that, and as members have highlighted, it's working out which of that's one-offs and ongoings, and that will come forward. I think there is a need for the sort of explanations that we've heard and explain to the public as much as anything through some of these documents, because these are seen outside the council, and I think sometimes people can get the wrong end of the stick as to how we understand it because we have it explained to us. Others are just simply looking at the figures. Sometimes that can be misleading, and as has just been outlined, if we can find some way of highlighting the outcomes that we're looking to do as a council, rather than just the inputs of the finances, because ultimately we'll all hear about providing services to the residents of Somerset rather than being budget monitors, but that's the process we have to go through to get to that other end. So you wanted to comment, please go ahead.
I was just going to come in to say the outturn position is a reflection of all the hard work that the council undertook following the financial emergency being declared. Had it not been declared at that point in time, you might not have been looking at an outturn that looks like this. So I know it's difficult to explain how suddenly the outturn swung the other way, but that's essentially what we were trying to do as a council. And if we hadn't have achieved that, really the question here today would have been, what else could you have been doing to swing it this way? That continued good work has been happening in this financial year and needs to now accelerate. Obviously, we're at the beginning of the financial year, so it's difficult to predict where certain things are going to land. But I take all the points on board, and we will find we'll try and evolve how we're articulating where we are, both visually and also so that the information is there so that you can follow the trends that are happening, but also the actions. I expect to see lists of mitigations in the reports to follow, and we will be tracking them. In the absence of lists of mitigations, that's where I expect scrutiny questions to come from. Where are your list of mitigations?
Thank you. If members are happy, we move on to the next report, which is item 7 on your agenda, which is the capital budget outturn. Councillor Ashton, do you want to say a few words and then we'll...
Thank you. I think actually, because these have already been seen at the executive meeting, this one is a kind of story of slippage, and I completely accept that lost opportunity when capital programme slips. But on the other hand, I would rather projects slipped than had gone in on contracts that then could not be fulfilled, and where we would end up with massive overspends that we couldn't cover. So happy to hand over to Nicola again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I suppose that it's obvious from the report that actually the variance of over 50% of profiled spend actually is quite a reflection on the fact that we're not doing accurate budget profiling here in terms of the spend. I think that's from an officer perspective and from a finance perspective. I don't think we pushed the project owner to do proper forecasting. I think one of the things I also found out when looking at this report is when we've received additional funding, whether it be grant funding or actually just receipt of the project monies from other to deliver on the programme, they've just put them into the programme in the year that they've received it rather than actually doing accurate profiling over it. So I think this was a reflection of the fact that the finance team had its struggles last year as well to do that. I'll be honest in that I'm working closely with the capital team now to do a whole new set of monitoring and break it down into individual schemes, and the budget monitoring is going to be picked up by the finance business partners alongside the revenue budget. So they're going to be working together to hopefully see an improvement. We didn't see that in Q1, and I think we didn't see that in the Q1 report in terms of the spend against the profile still being quite low. I think that's because the capital team were busy closing from last year and we haven't actually seen that. I'm expecting us to see quite a significant change when we see Q2 report. In terms of the profiling of that, because I've really pushed the team to say, can you get accurate monitoring? Can you actually challenge the organisation in terms of whether they are going to deliver, especially with everything else that's going on in the organisation for the right sizing at the moment. But I think there's a nervousness and there's a bit of a culture thing around not wanting to span projects over a number of years. And I think just breaking through some of that in terms of a capital programme is not just about a single year. It is normally over at least a 5-year period you would expect to see it. But I think there's just a nervousness around if they project too far, the funding being taken away. So we just need to break that barrier as well. But I don't really propose to go through the report in depth at this point in time, just because it's kind of done early August, so it's quite old now.
Okay, Councillor Seaver.
I agree with your assessment on what's been happening with reporting. You won't find most other bits of government, or indeed most bits of private industry, working this way. They're capital projects. They usually know the date they're expecting a bill on. They will have chosen which side of the quarter or the year end it falls in order to make the rest of the world run smoothly. They do an awful lot of that management. And I would expect our officers to be going at it in the same way. So when they're laying out, for example, the terms for repaving an area, they know what milestone they want to set in order to have it hit the right financial year and not cause any problems for Treasury. And equally, they should be monitoring it well enough that they know whether it's going to hit it or not. So more power to your elbow.
Councillor Chilcott and then Councillor Redmond.
Thank you. This is such a frustrating area. I think for me, when I held Liz's role, when you sat down and started challenging a budget, you know, have you got the capacity? Have you got the staff? Have you got the time to deliver what you're asking for? Sometimes the answer was no. So, and we know how pushed this organisation is. So it's being realistic. I think it's giving teams the reassurance that it's not going to be whipped away if it's put into several years, and there's a commitment to that. And for me, to be honest, if you get to 6 months and they are still way behind, it needs to be profiling. because, and if they are still not doing it like that, I think there needs to be some very strong conversations, because it does affect the budget, you know, the interest. I know some of it comes externally. And the other thing is that public expectation. We've got 3 town deals there, major for the towns. And we've got Bridgewater, Glastonbury, etc. And there's an expectation for things to be delivered there. And if it's there and it's in the plan and it's not going to happen again, I think locally there's a management issue there. So everything needs to come together with this. And I don't think we're there yet. So good luck, Nicola. But I think it needs a really firm hand. This is absolutely miles out. And at the moment, Q1 isn't looking a lot better for this year. So hopefully, you know, if the message can go back, we're watching and we'll see what it's like at 6 months. But, you know, to me, if it really is in the same place, some action needs to be taken.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out we're in heated agreement again. The difficulty is if you actually allow any variance from the plan. With most of our capital projects, we have a long tail of small contracts. Now, not only are we messing small contractors around, and very often there's a cascading effect. The plasterer's late, so the electrician can't do his final fix. So we have to actually work to the plan, and you know, that really becomes even worse where you've not got the capability in-house. You know, one of the things I do like about the way we do the housing turnarounds is it's largely our own team. We couldn't possibly cope with the variation of input that we have there if we were working entirely by contractors. We do use contractors, but the fact that it's our own team is key. And this comes back to something I've said in another place, which is, you know, project management skills and holding to account. We really need a lot of these facilities in-house, and it's a case of we can't trim right down to the bone. We have to leave some fat there to make the machine work and avoid the knock-on effects of extra cost, drag in the contract space, damage to local companies, and the other things that happen when we fall behind.
Certainly, there's no need to it's taken on board. Councillor Redmond.
Sound a bit monotonous now, isn't it? I support the comments of the previous speakers, and I think this report is really helpful. But I suppose mine will go to the next stage, in where there are lots, particularly around the climate and place money, so that the government money from its different places comes in, and I know the executive have been challenging the project managers to ensure that it includes the contingency. The contingency is sufficient, and they're also clear about not coming with any overspends. But the question is about the outcome of the projects. So whom is keeping an eye on each of the individual boards and their decisions to move a bit from here over to there, move a bit from here back again, and to meet it, so that the expectation is there, so that the project aims and objectives are completed. There are some changes, but whom is looking over the shoulders to make sure that those changes won't dramatically impact the project outcome, I suppose, would be a way to look at it. And I suppose, with my councillor hat on, where is the scrutiny for all these projects? Because they've all got individual boards, they've got different, and there aren't a lot of involvement from, to me, there doesn't appear to be a lot of involvement from councillors. Do you get the executive member will sit here, or a nominating member will sit there? But this is in our control, but who actually oversees it all?
Councillor Lashon, and then
do you mind if I take Glastonbury Town deal as an example, because I sit on that board? So the government what was DLUC now, MHCLG, made the money available to the accountable body. That was Mendip, now Somerset Council. The accountable body is a part of the Glastonbury Town Deal Board, which is an advisory board. So on Glastonbury, I sit there with the portfolio holder for assets, economic development. So it was Ros White, now Mike Rigby. There's a programme manager. And then there are grant funding agreements from the accountable body, Somerset Council, to each project. There were 12 projects, that went down to 11 and has now gone down to 10. Every time there is a significant change, that the accountable body has to go to MHCLG and ask for permission to make that reallocation. When Michael Gove was the Secretary of State, there was a change that up to 30% of a project cost could be reallocated across the projects of the town deal without having to go to government for that. But we have not done that in Glastonbury, and as far as I know, we've not done that in Bridgewater either. But the reporting is really clear. So it's from the board of the organisation or the body that has signed the grant funding agreement. Then it goes to the Town Deal Advisory Board. It's not called an advisory board, but that's what it is, because it can make recommendations to the accountable body, but it cannot take those decisions itself. Then there's the accountable body, and then the accountable body reports up to MHCLG. So I'm presuming, though I don't know, and I don't think Councillor Rigby's with us this afternoon, for the Levelling Up project, so the one that is the Social Care Academy in Bridgewater, I'm not sure that that has an advisory board in the way that the town deals do. But if you have a look on our list of outside bodies and partnerships, it has something called the forum. So I think that forum is the same as the board in Glastonbury and Bridgewater. They are all different. They're not, I wouldn't say they're easy, because they've been in existence in an incredibly challenging time. So where we've looked at that slippage on the Glastonbury town deal, that slippage was within the knowledge that the money had to be spent by the end of March 26. So we've got 18 months left. So now the pressure is really on to get those projects delivered and the money spent. That same pressure is right across the country, all 101 towns. And I have absolutely no idea whether government will have any change of thinking about that finish date. I've no idea. I do know that lots and lots of projects have had to be de-scoped and gone out to new project management, new tenders, new contractors, and then even after the contracts are let, they've had to go back and do value engineering. Those projects have all come at a really difficult time nationally because of the cost of construction, and they've also come at a really difficult time for Somerset because they've overlapped with LGR, and that move from one team of officers, say at Sedgemoor, say at Mendip, into one team in Somerset, and then those changes of personnel.
3 very quick points in comeback. That still didn't say, so in effect, and I'll paraphrase it, and please correct me because I will be wrong, it's one member who's looking over it for councillors. You talked about nominate, for example, Mike Rigby on one or the other, or yourself. So where's the bigger picture coming from? Secondly, going back on previous statements, the changeover in staff that we're having, and the knowledge drain, the expert bits about some of these projects we're losing. How are we being more comfortable? How are we being made to feel comfortable? No, on the risk register, this must put a risk onto the projects. And the final one, just to give you an example, you used your town council, I'll use the Centre of Excellence as an example. That's 3 pretty major stakeholders involved with that one in itself. And I think it's called the Joint Academy Board, was the one that you're looking for, where they're all represented. But just in relation to that alone, there are 9 different work streams for that particular one, of which there includes the ICB, the NHS, ourselves, and lots of. With my scrutiny hat on, I want to know how, as a councillor, I could be comfortable that things are going okay.
I think the people you really need to speak to have gone because they were in the previous government. I share some of your concerns. I think it's only fair to say, as well as the portfolio holder, we now have Lara Bell as head of regeneration and major projects. So she has taken over, but it has come at a time of change of personnel in this council. I would be the first to admit that, and also to express my concern along with yours that we have had those changes of personnel. One of my concerns is that this money is well spent. That's concern number 1. But concern number 2 for me is what might happen next with the new government, and how can we as a council be prepared for that? Because I know that some of these levelling up projects came with no warning. Absolutely no warning. And so a letter would arrive at a district council saying, you can be awarded up to 25 million for a town deal, and we'll be writing again with details of how you can apply for that. And that in itself was a massive piece of work to get that. And then on top of that, they dropped in what they called the accelerator fund. So that also took more work. But and where we go next, I think is as big a question for me, because if this council has all of these projects to finish, that will be a priority. Where then does that allow enough time with the limited number of officers, because we're talking about one council, not 4 or 5, to actually put together some more plans for the future, so that if and when more money comes forward for regeneration or economic development, that we're actually ready to step forward. So I think your points are really well made.
Chair, could I ask that for the sake of the AI taking the notes and the minutes for this particular meeting, that it's highlighted that you may wish that your committee highlight the concern with some of the oversight around some of the capitalised capital projects, and that we include the fact that obviously personnel changeover, etc., and things like that. And just to clarify why I'm saying it is because many years ago I was starting doing some work on Hinkley C, and that was going forward, and we are now some 12 years into that project, and a lot of the learning that was had through the officers working on Hinkley C has been lost. It's just something to look back. You may want to consider.
I've got Councillor Shearer.
So I think I saw Mandy ahead of me.
Just to say, I think to put that in a nutshell, there feels like a little bit of a lack of accountability around the capital programme. So it might be that the committee wants to have a relook at the programme where the slippage is and actually bring the officers in to ask the questions.
Forgive me, Chair, it's not necessarily the slippage, is what's coming out at the end. Does that meet the expectations of where it started?
I think it may well be. It's a question that we need to ask as to where it sits within scrutiny, because it may well be community scrutiny might want to ask for these sort of community projects to come before them. But I think that's a question we can certainly ask within the scrutiny family as to where it would best sit. Councillor Leishall.
And with audit, because I particularly requested that internal audit swap came in to do a report on one of the projects in the Glastonbury town deal. So that won't be too long about now that audit see that report.
Sorry, Liz, will that be coming through audit? That'd be interesting to look at. Thank you.
And so I was just thinking, thank you, it's a really useful debate. I was just thinking, of course, as a council, we're going to be working on our local plan coming forward. That should be the place where you would catch some of these anticipatory ideas about what next, which areas do need development or whatever. And I don't know where the creation of the local plan or formulation of the local plan, I don't know where that gets scrutinised, forgive me, I really don't know. So I don't know where that would be.
Okay, heading back into planning, which is dangerous. Understood.
Just a small point, Chair, just in relation, so the local plans, so I agree that would be one, but that's more meeting Councillor Lashon's suggestion about economic development, because that's something that's another skill that we're leaking in that. So the ED would sit under the plan, but where we are now, the overview, as you say, would be the important bit.
Any other comments or questions from members? Okay, so I think we're looking. Absolutely, we can pass on the thanks. I think members have highlighted, obviously, we've heard that. I think members welcome the fact there's going to be more information coming forward, particularly in terms of Q2 as to where we are with this and the issues potentially looking at what's happening in terms of delivery and particularly on the capital programme slippage and how we're addressing that. Because obviously, as members have said, we don't want to lose the projects, and equally, we don't want to run the risk of giving government the opportunity to come back and say, you haven't spent the money, so we'll have it back from you, which is always a bit of a danger with government. Again, it's been highlighted the need for the monitoring of project outcomes and whether that's sitting with us or, as I say, it may well be other scrutiny committees that need to pick up particular projects. But I think that's something, again, we need to look at as a family of scrutiny committees as to where it best sits, so it doesn't fall between us or end up with a number of us all trying to do the same job, because we don't want to duplicate either. So I think that's something we can take forward. If members are happy with that, thank you very much again. And we'll move on this time to agenda item 8, which is the housing revenue account. I think we're joined by Kerry Prisco online. Welcome, and welcome to the committee.
Hello, thank you.
Please introduce your report, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. So my name is Kerry Prisco, and I'm presenting the HRA, the Housing Revenue Account outturn report. This includes both revenue and capital position for the year 23-24. So overall, there was a revenue underspend of about 810k. There's a number of different reasons for those variances, varying from over recovery of dwelling rental income, as well as overspends on repairs and maintenance, mainly in the voids area. In terms of that 810k, it has been transferred to supplement general reserves to give a balance of about 12.8 million on general reserves. In terms of the capital outturn position, the actual spend during the year was 43.708 million, and we did finance that through a variety of different resources, such as the major repairs reserve, right to buy, and quite a lot of new grant monies that weren't anticipated at the beginning of the financial year. So a good news story there. In terms of budget returns, we only actually returned 171k, which just shows you how well the capital programme was managed during the year by the management team. In terms of the carry forward, there was 57.317 budget approved to carry forward into the new financial year. This is actually for approved schemes that were planned to be spent in future financial years, such as North Taunton Willow project. As part of the report, there was also a request to repurpose £1 million worth of underspend to match fund the energy efficiency works programme as part of the Eco4 scheme. Just to also flag that these figures are still provisional, subject to pulling together the final statement of accounts, and to also be subject to external audit. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Excellent, thank you very much. Any questions from members, please? Yes, Councillor Chilcott.
Talk to the others, I'm still scribbling. So first of all, thank you for the report. I suppose my first question is, this report is presented in a totally different flow to the other finance reports we have in the council, and it'd be really nice to see some commonality with the rest of the financial reporting. by way of example, the actual table that sort of covers the outturn position is tucked right at the end of the report, and it'd be nice to see that consistent with the others, with it at the head of the report, and then the sort of commentary follows on. So that's my first question.
Kerry, can I answer that?
Of course you
just
can.
Because I know there's a desire for Mira to actually not have a separate report from the HRA, to actually incorporate it into the main report, so not have it separated out. That's what she's used to. We haven't discussed that yet, and I haven't spoken to Kerry about that, and it's about how that then flows into one. So I'm not sure.
Also needs to be discussed with the portfolio holder.
But otherwise, we'll keep the report separate, but make it flow the same format.
Thank you. I'd prefer to see it separate if that's worth anything. I think there's plenty enough in the other reports, and it is a totally separate body and entity. And I think, again, from the public point of view, it should be kept separate for what it's worth. So I'll leave that there. My next question actually is around the fire safety. And so when I looked at that in the Appendix B on page 177, so we've got fire safety approved budget 4.298 million, actual capital outturn 1.645. And then we've got overspend 0, underspend 0. I couldn't quite understand that given the figures in the first two columns. So my question is, why is it we've got a budget for fire safety and we spent so little of it?
I will need to defer you to someone in the service. Is anybody in the service in the room? Otherwise, I can take that question away and ask them to come back to you.
Happy for them to come back.
If
you pop a written response to everybody, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And my next question, page 171, covers voids actually. And this is how, for me, a prime example of a decision in one part of the council affects the budget of another part of the council. So when we had the decision, it went through scrutiny about removing the 3-month grace period for voids as part of our council tax relief programme, relief and support. We decided as a council to take that 3 months away. I actually fought against that. I think what's really interesting for me is the amount here. There's an overspend of 280,000, and I think when I recall back to the report, it was only 600,000 or 700,000 it was saving. So probably a good proportion of that saving that we have made as a council has been lost off the HRA account, and certainly that conversation never took place as part of that decision. So I suppose for me the plea is, you know, if we are making decisions about any reliefs anywhere that's then going to affect another part of the business of the council, I think that should have been highlighted in the report, and it certainly wasn't. Thank you.
Councillor Ashall.
And yeah, I just wanted to make the point, it was 6 months at Mendip. So actually I took more stick from the Mendip area than I did from any other part of Somerset. Our intention was to try and get homes back into use more quickly. One of the things we've heard reported at the HRA is actually how much more work has been needed after a house is left, and that has been in places new kitchens, new bathrooms. I think, Kerry, there's been some significant pieces of capital expenditure needed before a house can come back into use. I think I'd agree that every time you make a decision on one thing, particularly on council tax, that it has implications elsewhere, and indeed sometimes unintended consequences. So I do agree that that is the case. In other places, I have started to see it, particularly in Mendip, because the 6 months has gone, actually see people get a move on and get houses back into use more quickly.
Thank you, and I will pick up again when we have a look at it, because for me, we really, really want to be encouraging. I think my example was sort of decarbonisation and installation, and quite often you've got to partly move out of a house where it's major works, and I think that's something we should absolutely encourage, as we should encourage improvements to any social housing, whether it's private landlord or council. We want to encourage that, and we do not want to discourage it because that grace period's gone. So it's just interesting that it was a decision made somewhere. You see it now affecting in this paper, and yet that wasn't a consideration at the time. So I hope moving forward that that is sort of clearly outlined in the paper, so it's clear for everybody. I missed it. I didn't realise it would have an impact here. Thank you.
Jessica, was there anything else you want to come back on with those?
No, thank you.
Councillor Seep.
Moving on to page 177, 173, I see one of the recommendations is to suggest to the executive that there's £1 million fired across in order to match fund insulation works or energy efficiency measures, which I wholeheartedly applaud. However, in the report, it doesn't actually make it clear how many properties this is going to affect. I'm presuming it's not all of them. And the other thing was just for information, in previous attempts to actually do mass insulation, one of the absolute nightmares for any project manager has been getting the loft cleared, because people simply don't wish to engage. They don't, some are unable to clear the loft, and many of them don't want you to clear the loft. But it's a labour cost which often falls outside of external funders' remits, and typically we have to get our own labour to do that in order to get the property upgraded. But I wholeheartedly endorse the attempt. Just you need to make sure that you can provide the labour to empty a loft and store the things that are in the loft, and presumably put them back afterwards. Otherwise, you won't get the two energy efficiency bands improvements on the property. Simply can't do it without doing the loft better. How many properties is it?
I honestly don't know personally how many properties it is exactly, but I will talk to the programme manager and ask them to send a response through to yourselves.
Yeah, I think if we send any of the written responses through to Jamie as committee manager, and then we'll make sure that's circulated to members. Councillor Seep.
Well, traditionally it goes to executive with an improved paper, so we'll pick it up then.
Just to note that the report's already gone through the executive. This is a retrospective review of this report.
Okay. Councillor Chilcott.
So sorry, I missed a question. If you'll indulge me, it's a very quick one. Page 176, right through the report, we see nothing for vehicles. I'm taking that's probably because they're leased and it's going through revenue, but there's lots of zeros for vehicles in the report. And the other thing is on page 176, if we look at the outturn variances at the bottom of the page on other operating income and expenditure, there's some really massive variances there, 245%, 184%. Some of those figures don't look quite right, so I'm not sure if there's something I'm missing with that little section. Again, bottom of page 176.
Thank you, I'll look into that one.
Thank you very much. Councillor Seep, and then Councillor Lightshall.
There is actually something on the vehicles line. There's an approved budget for this year. It's just no expenditure.
Yeah, we normally expect to see something in vehicle.
If I may.
Please
So
do.
yeah, thank you. So on the capital programme under vehicles, this is in anticipation of the new financial regulations coming into effect from the 1st of April 2024. This where we can actually capitalise the lease costs, but that doesn't start into the new financial year. That's why it's showing 0 in 23-24, and those costs are shown throughout the revenue account in 23-24.
Thank you. Councillor Lightshall.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point, and Kerry will correct me if I get any part of this wrong. I was looking at the fact that the reserves held are considerably greater than the recommended minimum, And then somebody said to me, if you only had the recommended minimum, that would be no more than £350 per home, which seems incredibly low, and actually made me feel that that level of reserves was much more appropriate than the recommended minimum.
I think also from when these were at district level, obviously there was a lot of borrowing taken on to facilitate us having the buildings back in effect from government funding. So over for the many years period of this, the reserves will fluctuate quite a lot, because there are some years where it's expected income is going to be lower and higher. So they're not going to stay around that level. There are years where it gets very tight on the budget going forward, I believe. But if you, Ms. Prisco.
Yeah, so yes, as you're saying, in section 8 about unearmarked reserves, yes, the minimum balance it does equate to about £385 per property. When we did set the budget for 23-24 as part of the new council, there was an exercise to review other HRAs around England and to see what their levels were, and we took kind of median of those to as a principle of setting our own minimum reserves. We do look to keep an eye on those, and if there are any suggestions from the interim section 151 officer would like to kind of feed that into our 25-26 budget setting process, and obviously more than welcome to receive those review recommendations.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other comments, so thank you very much for the report. Again, as members have highlighted, if we can see as the next reports come forward, a little more consistency with the format. But I must admit, I had it drummed into me when I was at the district about how separate the HRA is from the normal accounts that we have at the council, and that thou shalt not cross that boundary. So I would be very nervous about bringing them in together. Thank you very much. Okay, if there's no further comments, thank you very much, members. We'll move on to our next item, which I'll give the floor to Mr. Jackson for the discussion of the forward plan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very minded how long we've been here today, so I'll keep this fairly brief. But committee, please be advised the next meeting is scheduled for the 28th of October. We do only actually have currently 2 items scheduled for that agenda, which are month 5 budget monitoring and an improvement and transformation programme update. The chair and myself, along with lead officers, will be meeting for an agenda set meeting on Wednesday afternoon this week, but very happy to take any suggestions from members as to something they would like to see on the agenda. The following meeting after that is the 25th of November, which we have a very stacked agenda for. I'm not sure, looking at that, whether there's anything that can be brought forward. So,
Chairman, can we look at taking reports before decisions rather than after them?
Absolutely. No, we will. Yes, that is certainly the intention of when we changed the dates of the meetings, was to ensure that we could try and do that. It was a little bit with the outturn of this particular one. We just had so much on our agenda, we couldn't cope with all of it in one go.
And similarly, in terms of timely feedback, I'm conscious that we've just taken a financial report 3.5 months after and 2.5 months after. I'd have thought in the month after it, after month end, would be our ideal, so that we get a lagging no more than 1 month behind. Otherwise, things could get quite out of shape in the time that's passed. And I know that's a challenge.
I think certainly the executive holder and officers have heard that request, and I think we would be keen to be as prompt as we can. But I think we need to make sure there's the adequate time to actually make the reports deliverable. Councillor Leish,
I just wanted to make the point of the first year Microsoft Dynamics, and as well as LGR and everything else. I think everybody agrees with your hope that it will be more timely in the future, and I would very much like not to be reporting on outturn reports at the same time as Q1.
I don't think it's just those issues that Councillor Leighton's highlighted. I think it's also the fact of the publishing date of the agenda papers is so much earlier, but also is the internal process that has to be followed makes it impossible to meet those deadlines. We do try and bring it as quick as we can, but I don't think we can pull back. I don't think you could have, say, the end of September's on the October agenda. It's just too tight. Timeline.
Sure you can. So the substantive part of this should be fact. It shouldn't be something that can be anything other than interpreted. So surely we should be able to get a live interpretation. We often take a paper with a verbal report will be given, but the actual facts of the matter should be out live on the 1st of October for September, because it's been added up by a computer, and the report could go into the agenda straight afterwards, or we're just accepting that people are allowed to put stuff in and we'll fix it later, which is working it twice. It's not efficient and effective. I know I'm being unrealistic. I'm just pointing out the logic of what you just said.
I think certainly if officers and members can take away the fact that obviously we would like the reports to be as timely as possible. Yes.
If only the whole report could be produced by the hit of a button.
Then now we've got all this AI stuff we were being told about earlier. You never know. But, Councillor Redmond and then Councillor Chilcott.
I think just on that point, building on from Councillor Seep's comments, obviously due consideration should be given to the council's constitution, and what to move it a little bit further forward. One would hope that if it goes to executive without going through the scrutiny committee, that point of the paper, the report where it says scrutiny comments, it will be made clear to the fact that it hasn't gone through scrutiny, because otherwise.
So our timetable has been adjusted so that everything should come through scrutiny before, and it was only because these reports couldn't get through the agenda.
The reason I put my hand up, Chair, is just going back to the comments from the previous the item before the last one about the capital and the way that the oversight, I suppose, is in relation that you may want to take an initial look at some of the easier ones as a committee to see which you want to look at and how you want to look at them, because as Councillor Lation has already indicated, the oversight, the way that a lot of them are put together are quite massive and different bodies, but that might be something that you may want to take an initial look at to have a view on, because it may mean that if the committee or the committees, scrutiny committees, are that interested in it, there may need to be a small working group to figure out what the priorities are and stuff like that. So you may want to review that at some point.
We'll certainly have a look at that and discuss with the other committees. Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you. I once served with council many years ago, a district that's working in real time on the finances. So it is there, it is possible. However, for this organisation right here and now, I'm not sure we're anywhere near that. So Chair, just picking up really from the meetings and ideas for moving forwards, I think there was quite a bit of interest in the capital programme generally, and there might be one or two bits that you as Chair want to have a look at that were areas of interest. And the other area of interest I think that keeps coming up is transformation. But again, I think that needs thought with the other committee chairs to look at who sort of looks at what. But if I listen to the two issues that have probably been prevalent, I think unless anybody's think of anything else, that would probably be the two.
Yeah, and certainly on the transformation, we will be having a joint meeting of chairs and vice chairs to look at how we take that forward, because I think we all accepted we need to work out how that's best dealt with. Okay, I'm not seeing any other comments, so can I thank you all today for what has been a very long session with both. Absolutely, but it's been a very long day for everybody, so thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you for the officers very much for their presentations, and again thank you to the executive members who've made the effort to join us. It is appreciated because it does add to our ability to scrutinise, so thank you all. Meeting closed.
Thank you, Chair.